Welcome to the podcast Road to Inclusion from the Atlas Alliance. In this podcast series, we'll cover themes such as disability rights, disability inclusion, the empowerment of persons with disabilities, inclusive international development aid, and disability inclusive humanitarian action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new and exciting episode of the podcast Road to Inclusion. I'm your host, Kagan Shabra, and I'm the project manager for inclusion at the Atlas Alliance. And today we have an exciting, fascinating, insightful guest who is tuning in digitally from the United States. Her name is Rosangela Berman Beeler. Rosangela is the global lead on disability in the UNICEF. And in this podcast, we'll talk about Rosangela's work with regards to UNICEF. We'll talk about the Global Disability Summit and how UNICEF has been working with the Global Disability Summit to make it a huge success. And we'll talk about all the work which Rosangela and UNICEF has been doing to realize the sustainability development goals and specifically leave no one behind agenda. But before we jump into that conversation with Rosangela, a little bit about description of me right now. I'm right now wearing black buttoned up shirt. I'm having blackish gray jacket. I'm wearing blue tinted glasses. There is a white wall with a red lighting, so the wall look kind of pinkish in the studio at Hello Media. And I have long, curly, dark hair. And with that, I give you Rosangela. Rosangela, hi, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me today here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to
Hi,
listen to your voice. Yeah,
thanks, Gagan. Thank you for having me.
yeah. Rosangela, would you like to describe yourself for our audience, please?
Sure. Yes, I'm a woman. Actually, my accent is from Brazil. I'm Brazilian, and I have a kind of long hair, brownish, more or less. I'm wearing glasses. They are green, and I also have a jacket that is kind of purple. My background is right now a little foggy, so but I have a glass wall
All right.
behind me. So thank you for having me today, Gavin.
Wonderful. It's a pleasure, Rosangela. I can't wait to jump into all those conversations about UNICEF and GDS with you. But before we do that and take a deep dive into those issues, if you could tell our listeners who is Rosangela Berman Beeler, the global lead on disability at UNICEF?
Oh well, Rosangela, and I will not talk in third person. I'm a person very privileged. I was born in Brazil.
Mhm.
And when I was 18, I had a car accident and I became a quadriplegic. And I engaged immediately inside of a rehab center on advocacy for better food, for privacy, for this and that. I use a power wheelchair, and today I'm 64, meaning that 45 years already living as a quadriplegic, which defines me and defines my life. I worked very many decades as an advocate from Brazil. That in Brazil, I uh, had a chance to lead the disability movement in different moments and also start working internationally. And since 2096, I live in the US. Um, Worked a little bit for the Inter-American Development Bank and then the World Bank for several years. I know that you interviewed Judy Hillman here, and we worked together there, and with Charlotte McLean as well. And then after this, I also run an institute, the Inter-American Institute on Disability, and then finally joined UNICEF 10 years ago as a senior advisor on disability. First time that UNICEF had such position, and we have been there for all these years, where many things happened, and it's a privilege to work in UNICEF as well.
Yeah, so you have a very, very eclectic background. And one thing which struck me the most is the fact that you said that you were born and raised in Brazil, and you used the word privileged on a couple of occasions, and how you were so involved in this disability rights movement in Brazil. Do you want to linger a little bit on that? Because you are one of our first guests who is quote unquote representing a country which belongs to the global south.
Sure. I also say that I'm a privilege because I am. In reality, I used to say that if I was born like maybe 1 kilometer out of my neighborhood, I would be in a favela in Rio, and probably instead of surviving 45 years until now with a severe disability, I would have lived 1 year and have no rights. So this makes me for sure a privilege. In developing countries, that's what we see. That while in countries from the north, a person with a disability will live as many years as any other person. If you are in the south, you will not survive more than 1 year. And it's not because of any characteristic of the individual, but for sure is about the environment where we live and we have access to, right? So uh, when we are here talking about all of this that we have been helping to advance, etc., we know that we are in a very privileged position because we could go to school, we could have access to transportation, to food, to safe, clean water, and to everything that now we fight for others to have.
Absolutely. You're spot on when you said that often when people live in the global north, it kind of you have a very sequestered understanding of the challenges or barriers encountered by persons with disabilities because they kind of get amplified in the global south context where there is such huge amount of crushing poverty, grinding challenges, as well as issues linked to access and violence as well. The way you give the example of favela, for instance, and it could be a very different reality. I fully appreciate and understand that. You mentioned in the beginning as well about Judy Human, and she was one of the pioneers of the independent living rights movement. And when I was researching about you, I found out that you also did that in Brazil. Do you want to tell our listeners something about that?
Yeah, sure. Again, the privilege, right? I was invited in some point by Partners of the Americas to go to the US, and there it was interesting because I had an agenda of this exchange, like visiting hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and I said, I want to see an organization of persons with disabilities. And then they took me to an independent living center in DC, Washington, and it was my first experience. Of course, right after I met Judy for the first time in the same trip, and it was the year where they were fighting for the American with Disabilities Act, and I had the chance through Judy's influence to participate also in the demonstrations and to learn about the independent living movement. And when I came back, we got together with our uh, friends with disabilities, part of the disability movement in Brazil, and we founded the first independent living center in Rio de Janeiro that now it's 35 years old, which is great. It's still there.
Wow, many congratulations. And there's one thing in common between us, Rosangela, you and I. When I got a chance to go to the US for my research stay, whilst I was doing my PhD, I got a chance to meet Judy as well and spend some time with her, and of course, get inspired by her dynamism and rights advocacy and the whole drive to create a much more inclusive, fair, just world for persons with disabilities. So that's something in common. So it's very nice to hear that she at some point in your life inspired you as well.
Oh, we should continue spying for her.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So now we could circle back to your work in the UNICEF, Rosangela. UNICEF is extremely important multilateral organization. It does phenomenal work across 190 countries. So if you could kind of dwell upon your work as a global lead on disability in UNICEF, and you also mentioned this that some years ago this position did not exist, but now it has been existing. So what happened? So how did you get that position, and what kind of work you are engaged in? And if you could dwell a little bit about the success stories or challenges in your work at UNICEF, that would be great.
Sure. Um, well, it was an interesting process. I think that the most important thing that happened that influenced the whole world, as we know, is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Since its adoption, and I had the privilege again to participate from scratch, from the thinking of having a convention until when it was adopted. And I think that this changed everything because just for UNICEF, it's interesting to see that disability was part of child protection only because the reference of disability came from this Convention on the Rights of the Child
Yes.
that had a mention on disability, the first convention that mentioned children with disabilities, and it was mostly under protection. Of course, uh, talking about all the rights, but protection was there very clear. And then after the convention, the CRPD, UNICEF staff working on human rights started to understand that disability should be cross-cutting to everything UNICEF does, to all kinds of rights that children have. And then the team working with human rights, gender equality, adolescents participation started fighting for a position on disability. And the story that I've heard is that they wanted to have a program specialist. And when they went to talk to, at the time, Tony Lake, that was the executive director, he said, let's make it a senior advisor position. And I applied and I got the job. Actually, I came to UNICEF that year to provide the first course on disability rights for staff in headquarters. And in the middle of the course, I was informed that I got the job. And it was nice to be there with the whole team talking about disability rights. And here we are. I will be retiring this year, and hopefully we'll have a fantastic person replacing me in by the end of the year to continue this work with a fantastic team that we have put together during this whole 10 years.
Oh, wow. No, this was fantastic. A wonderful thing to hear what you mentioned right now, that how the first convention which talked about child or children with disabilities was the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and they looked at it only from a lens of protection because, of course, we know from statistics that children with disabilities are much more prone to sexual abuse, to physical violence, and a lot of torture and degrading treatment. And from that, what you mentioned, which was very critical, one keyword was this cross-cutting. This the fact that to view disability as a comprehensive lens through which you could look at not just only protection of the children with disabilities, but also their right to education, their right to feel included in the community, the right to play, their right to feel safe, the right to be heard. All of those things. I think it's very important that you mentioned that. And from your work this past decade, you is there some specific success story with regards to lobbying for the rights of the children with disabilities, which you want to share with us?
I think that successful stories, I think it's today we have a chance to measure, for example, in UNICEF, uh, the the results that we get on children with disabilities for children with Disabilities, we just launched, with the support of Norway, uh, the first data study that encompasses 30 countries, research, household surveys on disability, not only on disabilities, mix is the multiple indicators clusters of UNICEF, which is a methodology to collect data on children. And the interesting thing is that as UNICEF developed with the Washington Group a module on children with disabilities, uh, we are using it in that a big research of UNICEF in 30 countries that measure child survival, nutrition, education, poverty, gender aspects, everything that into health indicators, and now we can cross the indicators on disability with all these other indicators. And for the first time, we could get a precise idea of the number of children with disabilities in the world. And this number was 240 million children with disabilities in the world. It's 1 in 10 children that now we can really know that are out there and are being deprived of most of their rights, as you were talking about, right? The right to survival, the right to health, to early education, to education in general, to having decent family life, community life, many times being institutionalized and being exposed to much more violence, neglect, abuse, stigma, and discrimination that is the origin of all this exclusion that children with disabilities face all over the world.
Yes, wow. Like, I want the audience to chew on this number of 240 million children with disabilities because it's so important to kind of remind the broader audience that this is a very huge group we are talking about. And a vast majority of them live in the global south, live in the developing world, and their rights are more often than not trampled. And yes, it's just so crucial to kind of accentuate this. So thank you, Rosangela, for explaining that so eloquently. Uh, if now we could pivot towards, for instance, the sustainability development goals, because you mentioned a key word in the previous intervention of yours, indicators. And we know sustainable development goals came in 2015. They were supposed to go until 2030. There is this major umbrella which says, leave no one behind. And what I would want you to do is for us, if you could dwell on your role in the UNICEF and explicate to us that what kind of goals specifically do you work on with regards to children, young people, young adolescents with disabilities, which are aligned with the SDGs?
Yes, this is an important question, and the SDGs guide UNICEF work. Of course, we are just starting a new strategic plan now, 2022-25. And the interesting thing is that all the goals that persons with disabilities focus on, and of course, all the goals are important for people with disabilities and for children with disabilities, and UNICEF um, working for the rights of children. Children with disability would be addressed in everything that we do. So if you think, for example, uh, poverty reduction or elimination, right? When UNICEF is working for poverty reduction, of course, it benefits children with disabilities as well. The same thing, zero hunger, that it's the second SDG, the right to health, to quality education. In SDG 4, quality education and inclusive education, it's a very, very strong goal for the world, for everybody, and for children with disabilities especially. It's about inclusive education and equality in education. And UNICEF is the bigger implementer of inclusive education and of education in the world, in every country that we work. So that's a very important work for us. We see, for example, on our own indicators, we have children, at least 140 countries are in UNICEF, are reporting on inclusive education for children with disabilities, efforts on inclusive education. So UNICEF supporting programs on the ground. The same way, for example, we have a number of children with disabilities reached in the world is still lower in terms of how much we can measure. So last year we had 2.2 million children being reached by UNICEF programs. And for example, with cash transfers, we have a number of children reached in 2020 that was 826,000 children. But of course, these are numbers that every year are evolving. So we work on emergencies, as you know, both education in emergencies and everything else on emergencies, provision of assistive technology, and making sure that children with disabilities are receiving the nutrition, that when we work on climate change, children with disabilities are included there. Reduction of inequalities as a whole, that is so important for disability. Also sustainable cities and communities. And right now we have this very, very strong focus on bringing inclusive quality services and support for children with disabilities in the community, right? That's one of our main areas of work now with the GDS. We'll get there in a little bit, but we consider that when services are available in the community, inclusive and accessible quality services, children with disabilities will be able to live with their families and to be served by the community as any other child. And that's an important focus of what we have right now.
Absolutely right. What you said in the end, that at the end of the day, children with disabilities are children first. So they also have a right to education, right to learn, right to be participating in the community, right to be living with the families in a safe environment. And the answer which you gave about how UNICEF is taking a comprehensive, holistic approach, right from talking about malnourishment, zero hunger, reducing poverty, reducing inequality, making sure that schools are accessible, curriculum is accessible, inclusive education is operationalized at the grassroots level. I think this is the kind of approach which we need, because if we want leave no one behind to be actually operationalized and to be realized, then we cannot leave 240 million children with disabilities or 200 million young people with disabilities out in the picture, out of that picture. Otherwise, that goal will never be realized. What say you?
Yes, exactly. And don't forget SDG 17 also on increasing availability of high quality data disaggregated by disability, right? And I think that if I would select a successful story from UNICEF among many, um, the possibility of disaggregating data by children with disabilities today, by disabilities, right? Uh, by type of disability, just for you to have an idea, this last report brings data on, for example, psychosocial disabilities, data on level of depression that children with disabilities present, a more like depression, not like just for eventual situations like the COVID impact, but something more permanent, that we never could measure before, and now we can. So I think that the availability of disaggregated data on disability is critical for us to really have a clear idea of what's out there and how we can assist and support this population to move forward with dignity and realizing all their rights.
Oh, you're hitting the nail on its head, Rosangela, with this that the significance of data cannot be understated. Like, data is the lifeblood when it comes to rights advocacy, because if we don't identify persons with disabilities within the community, if they are hidden away, if there are no statistics with regards to how many children with disabilities are there, then how do we make the duty bearers responsible, accountable for their lack of action, for their lack of resources, for their implementation failures? So that is the first step, and it is fantastic to hear, and kudos to UNICEF to make sure that the data is being collected across different countries with regards to children with disabilities, and it's being disaggregated based on the disability status and the types of disabilities, because then we understand the real gravity of the situation. Yes, so absolutely, you're right to accentuate that the data is the key, especially in these times when all rights-based advocacy has to be data-driven and fact-based driven. Yeah. So you mentioned in that previous intervention about this three-letter, which is quite crucial in these times, GDS. That's the Global Disability Summit. And the first one happened in London in person in 2018, and you were involved in that, right, Rosangela?
Yes,
So,
yes, we were very involved from
w-
supporting the organization, being there with our director, executive director,
yes.
ED4. Mhm.
Wonderful. So, would you like to reflect upon that process? Because now you can look into the rearview mirror, and some time has passed. And could you reflect upon a few lessons drawn from the Global Disability Summit 2018? What worked, what did not work, and what could have been better?
Yeah, sure. I think that it worked well. It was the first experience of that time, of that type that we, as organizations, uh, all types of stakeholders around the world, uh, had to commit globally to some specific results for persons with disabilities. And the most important thing that happened, that I see that it will continue happening now, was that the commitments were recorded, were disseminated, and were measured. And every year we had a global report on the commitments. It helped us as internal advocates for our organizations to have something solid, a global commitment that we had to report every year, and this was very important. It brought um, a special mm, a special accountability, I would say, beyond the accountability that we have inside of the organization and with our own reports, but also reporting to the world globally under specific report dedicated to disability. It's something very important. And we saw many results from it. I think that just seeing today UNICEF reporting to the global commitments of 2018, we had commitments on data, on stigma and discrimination, assistive technology, humanitarian action, education for sure, and how much we achieved since there is fantastic. Now we are uh, uploading about 40 different commitments in all the areas of the GDS 2022, and we look forward to the global reporting every year on this too. We also report to the UN disability inclusion strategy that is critical for us and allow us not only to work programmatically on disability, but inside of the organization in culture change, addressing disability discrimination in the workplace, or increasing the amount of employees with disabilities. We have today a community of employees with disabilities that have our own network, and so many things are happening during these last 4 or 5 years. So we look forward to the Global Disability Summit 2022 results as well, and all the commitments that, as in UNICEF, I'm sure, multiplied across stakeholders. And we look forward to reporting on them every year and increase our results as well.
That sounds wonderful to hear because one thing is to make the commitment, and the other thing is to actually measure after the commitment is made how far have we implemented it, what are the shortcomings, what are the shortfalls, where have we succeeded, and what kind of challenges are there which have to be circumnavigated. And it's music to my ears to hear that that you mentioned about the UN disability inclusion strategy and the changing of culture, that how inside the UN system now there are more employees with disabilities, there are networks which are operational. That is fantastic news, because nothing about us without us. Should, if it has to be materialized, if it has to be operationalized, then we've got to walk the talk and recruit persons with disabilities in positions wherein they could influence the conversation. Before we move any further with regards to the GDS, do you want to dwell a little bit about the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy? Because that seemed to be an important landmark, and it happened in 2019.
Yes, it started in 2019. Secretary General announced it. And again, we have indicators throughout, coming from leadership, participation of organizations of people with disabilities, uh, accountability on procurement, and all, you name it, all the important things that show that an organization is more inclusive. And then you can measure every year the progress on it. So go ahead.
I was about to say that. So that means that the UN is walking the talk when it comes to including persons with disabilities in different walks of the life and the systems.
Oh, yes, for sure. And the accountability is big not only in headquarters, but also in the field. It's interesting because it's the first time that we are talking about not only programs, which is, of course, critical because it's where we reach to the majority of persons with disabilities in the world, but also operations, how we build our organizations, right? From ICT, for example, accessibility in the premises, and again, number of employees with disabilities, etc. So it has been a revolution inside of the UN.
So big milestones taking place. 2018, the first Global Disability Summit in London. 2019, the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy. So, and now we are looking forward to the Global Disability Summit 2022, which is happening in less than a month's time. So, Rosangela, if I may ask you, what are your expectations from and your aspirations for the GDS 2022?
So our expectations are the best ones. We have a new executive director um, arriving in UNICEF now, and it will be probably one of the first events that she will be participating. So this is super exciting to see. We have, as I said, many commitments in all areas of the manual of GDS. We have been working very closely also with you, with Norway, with Atlas Alliance, with the government as well, NORAD. As we have a partnership, we have currently a partnership that we call Norway UNICEF Partnership Framework on Disability Inclusion. Many things are happening here. We are developing a global research agenda. We launched the data report. We are developing the first ever disability inclusion policy and strategy in UNICEF that will align with the global commitments that we will be um, presenting to the Global Disability Summit. So everything that we'll be committing there will be part of our global strategy, and it will be the accountability UNICEF will have on implementing programs for children with disabilities, and not only programs, again, operations as well. So from culture change to um, everything else that the organization does, corporate responsibility, um, and our activities in all the 190 countries. So it's super exciting, and we hope that it will be a big success. We are collaborating with Atlas also as co-hosts of the Global Youth with Disability Summit. A lot, many members of my team very involved.
Yes.
As part of our partnership with Norway, we also have a close, it's a global network of youth with disabilities that we have together with the International Disability Alliance, working very closely. So it's fantastic to see the amount of youth from all over the world. And I have to reinforce what you mentioned before, a lot of youth from the South. I think that's what is transformative today.
Yes.
We need much more voices from the South. Normally, they are not visible, and they don't have the chances that you and I had to reach out to countries where we could have opportunities to learn more, to advance our causes in our countries, and to start working globally. So I think it's our um, accountability now to make sure that these voices are heard, right? And then we can diversify these voices, bring issues that normally in the north are not an issue, but in the south is excluding millions and millions and millions of the 80% of people with disabilities living in the south. Right?
Yes. Yeah, wow. Like you gave such a comprehensive and insightful answer. And in that specific intervention, one thing which stood out for me is, of course, this word which you used a couple of times, partnership and collaboration. And I think that is a key when it comes to realizing any kind of success with regards to disability inclusion, disability mainstreaming, or disability rights advocacy work. Because if we just work, we in the sense, OPDs, Organization of Persons with Disabilities, in isolation, then we will be able to make some progress for sure. But what we need is an active involvement and a proactive engagement with stakeholders like yourself, like individuals from multilateral organizations like the UNICEF. We need, you mentioned corporate social responsibility. You mentioned about culture change. We have to ensure that people understand that disability is a much more universal issue, and disability inclusion is something which is everybody's business. So that is something which is very, very important, and also very, very, very gratitude, a lot of gratitude for stating about diversifying the voices of persons with disabilities and young people with disabilities from the South, because, as you said, they're often invisibilized. It's the usual suspects we hear often in the North. That's great to hear, Rosangela, about as an individual, because you're a person with disability, you are paraplegic, and you're also a representative coming from the UNICEF. Are there some specific outcome which you would want to achieve from the Global Disability Summit 2022?
Gagan, I was listening to you and remembering some things from when we started, for example, disseminating the concept of inclusive development, right? Disability inclusive development. It's important to mention that normally when you talk about inclusion, when the world talks about inclusion, we persons with disabilities think that they are talking about disability, but they are not. In reality, we are talking about gender, we are talking
Yes.
about poverty, we are talking about geography, but we are not talking about disability. It's still a population very invisible that we have to continue raising that profile. And I remember that those discussions in my time of the World Bank, actually talking about inclusive development, that today we know that we have to say disability inclusive development, not only inclusive development. If not, unfortunately, we have to continue reinforcing the the aspect of disability. I remember that we were once in Nicaragua in a workshop, and I was saying that there's a lot known about disability, and we working in the field, we know how much information we have about disability, how to address the issues, what are the solutions, how to get there. But unfortunately, until I think it's getting much better now, and the Global
Yes.
Disability Summit is an example of this. But this information used to be like under the soil, so
True.
nobody would see it. And I was using a metaphor saying that we needed the disability to come up as a volcano and spread the information on disability throughout the world, so it would influence everything we do. And it has to do with partnerships as well. I think that, as you said, nobody will change this situation from one stakeholder's perspective only. Never. It's impossible. It's impossible to bring justice to the world only with one stakeholder, or to reduce poverty. It's impossible. We need partnerships. It's one of the SDG goals as well. And it's critical. We are super grateful for the opportunity that we're having with the work we're doing with Norway now, and grateful also for the Global Disability Summit 22 that will give us an opportunity to scale our work, to talk about disability to other partners that until now are not involved, like private sector, for example, right? It's a big gap, I think, still among stakeholders that are working on disability, and we are uh, also very committed to bring those partners that are still out to work also on disability. So I see the summit as an opportunity for example, climate change. I
Yes.
think that Norway is bringing so strongly now climate change, and it's changing already the way the disability community is working on it, starting to look at
Yes.
climate change in different contexts and etc. We are doing this with children with disabilities as well, and these are all opportunities of advancing the area in every aspect that is relevant for human being, and that's where we have to be. And the Global Disability Summit will allow us to move some steps forward on this direction.
Oh, when I listen to your intervention, I'm remembering this, that say the word disability, say the word disabled, be have a sense of joy and pride and hope and affirmation in your identity. And as you said very poignantly and eloquently, that we need the metaphor of not being buried under the soil, but more like a volcano erupting and then spreading across the globe. And I hope that Global Disability Summit 2022 is that catalyst moment, and it helps in bringing those partnerships come to life. I got an excellent opportunity to talk to Vladimir Shuk, the executive director at the International Disability Alliance, and he echoed a similar point that private sector, where is private sector in this conversation when it comes to disability inclusion, disability mainstreaming, and disability justice? Because the private sector is more than happy to talk about racial issues, gender issues, environmental issues, but what about disability issues? So we've got to kind of make this a much more important case for them as well to take up forward in GDS 2022. We quickly want to pivot towards, for instance, the youth summit. You talked about this, Rosangela. From a UNICEF standpoint, what are your expectations from the Global Disability Summit, the Youth Day, which is going to take place on 14th February?
My expectations are huge. My team, many people on the team, they are very involved, producing videos with the voices of young people from the South that would not be able necessarily to be there live during the summit. 24-hour summit, I think it's amazing. It's
Yes.
an experience, an innovation, and I have to say congratulations to all the organizers, because it's a very strong commitment to have 24-hour summit with people around the world mobilizing. I'm seeing, for example, our regional offices of UNICEF in South Asia, in Asia Pacific, in LACRO, in all the regions, really engaging and identifying youth and working with AIDA to bring those voices. Um, and it's amazing. I think it's a revolution, and I think it's something that I would say young people. I'm telling you this to you in person, Gagan. I think that you are a fantastic example of what inspiring a young person can be, with or without a disability, and we are getting far. We need to be bold. Every opportunity that we have to use this opportunity in a way that we can get the most out of it. And I think that this is what the Youth Summit will be. It's a challenge, because just imagining the amount of sign languages that we need, the amount of languages, captionings, and um, time frames that you'll be dealing with, it's a big challenge. I know that there's no funding that would be enough to achieve the full accessibility that we would need, but participation will be there. And I'm sure that everybody, organizers and participants, will try to make the best that they can from this opportunity and have their voices heard for sure. I hope that we also, when we talk about youth, we don't forget the adolescents, that are
Yes.
a population very, very neglected, with a lot of difficulties, lack of opportunities, invisibility. And I hope that every young leader will remember when they were adolescents and talk about adolescents needs and aspirations, and bring them in together with you.
You're spot on with your analysis, Rosangela. But just to put things into perspective for the audience, when you said 24 hours summit a day, so 14th February, we are going to follow digitally the clock, sun from the far east. The summit will begin, the youth summit, and it'll end in America. So we will be in the Asia Pacific region, in South Asia, Asia region, then come towards Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and then finally towards Americas. And what you said is so important, that this is a summit wherein young people with disabilities get a chance to represent themselves, have their authentic voices heard from the global south, talk about the issues which are important for them, be it education, employment, healthcare, deinstitutionalization, living independently, stigmatization, discrimination, climate change, and the rest, and make sure that their message is heard at the broader Global Disability Summit, because these young people with disabilities are agents of change in their societies. Yeah, thanks for that, Rosangela, and for the audience, they should know this, that this event is co-hosted by UNICEF, Rosangela's team is doing phenomenal job, as well as the International Disability Alliance team members. They are doing a great job, along with Atlas Alliance members and the Norwegian Mental Health Youth, who's participating in organizing this event. So, if you have to give a piece of advice, Rosangela, for the youth summit or for the broader global disability summit to the members and the partners of Atlas Alliance, what advice would that be? Because you are from the multilateral organization, so you're in a little different world than us.
Yes, I think that for Atlas Alliance and for the disability movement in general, we have to use this opportunity to get the best we can, and the best will come through commitments that are really measured and realized, right? If I were part of um, an organization of persons with disabilities or serving persons with disabilities, I would take this opportunity, especially from Norway, that is the promoter of the summit. I would take this opportunity again. I will repeat this word because I think it's what we need now. Be bold. Let's push as much as possible to the ideals that adolescents, young people, children, adults with disabilities have, and put all these cards on the table, making sure that the duty bearers are there and responsive to the, the calls for action that people with disabilities will have during the summit. So it has to come from you guys, right? And the others will follow. So the others have to respond, but the calls have to come from you. So I look forward to seeing the charter. I think it will be very important and to guide us through at least the next 4 years, if not towards 2030. So I look forward to being part of it in many different ways and to continue being part of it in the following years as a different stakeholder maybe. But it's a privilege again to be able to participate on it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and it's a privilege for us to partake into with your or listen to your insights, Rosangela, because what you mentioned, that the cause has to come from the disability movement, and it should be ably supported by stakeholders, powerful, influential stakeholders like those in the UN system, those in the private sector, or those in the mainstream organizations. Because without partnership, we cannot realize the objective of leaving no one behind. When we are talking about 1 billion people with disabilities, or 240 million young children with disabilities, or 200 million young people with disabilities, if they are left out from the conversation, the SDGs broad goal will not be realized. So it's very, very important. So thank you so much for accentuating that. I heard in the beginning of the podcast that you said that you're going to retire this year. What plans for retirement, Rosangela? Anything exciting you want to share with us, or something which you have thought about but not told anybody?
Well, retiring from the UN when you are 65, you must retire
Yes.
compulsively. So retiring from the UN, but not from work in general. Not, I could not live without my work. That is my passion. Working for persons with disabilities. What will be, I don't know. But I will try to balance my time better than I do now. Have a little more personal life and write a little bit, not technically, but yes, and continue working and be in touch for sure. You'll see me around, I'm sure.
I'm almost blind, so I will not definitely see you around, but I will hear your voice around.
You
I'm
will.
I'm definitely sure about that, and I really appreciate your mentorship and the fact that you are willing to be engaged, and the work will continue. Rights advocacy will continue, and we need passionate change makers like yourself to guide all the crop of young people with disabilities and the young adolescents with disabilities to argue for and create an inclusive, just, equitable, fair society for all of us participate. Thank you so much, Rosangela, for this from UNICEF. We really appreciate your input, your time, your patience, and for all the listeners, please check out the globaldisabilitysummit.org website. Go and check out what Rosangela was saying, the phenomenal work which has been done with regards to the Global Disability Summit Youth with Disabilities. They have wonderful pages on Instagram and on Facebook, and the UNICEF team has been doing a wonderful task of disseminating information, showcasing videos with voices of youth with disabilities from the South. And check out Rosangela's illustrious career and the fantastic work she has done for decades. Thank you, Rosangela, once again. Bye-bye from Oslo.
Bye. Thank you so much, Gagan.
Bye-bye.
Looking forward to working with you. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast episode. I hope you found this conversation engaging, enlightening, and a little bit entertaining. And if yes, then I hope you get a chance to follow the other episodes as well. And please subscribe and share the podcast series Road to Inclusion.